Richard Carver signed the divorce papers with a victor's smile, completely unaware his wife had just bought his mistress's airline business. The very empire his new lover had sworn would make them rich beyond measure. For 15 years, he dismissed Clare as nothing more than a housewife who couldn't grasp the complexities of his consulting work. Never suspecting the quiet woman organizing his socks had quietly built a financial fortress that now owned every asset his mistress, Vanessa Sterling, claimed as her own. He divorced her that Tuesday morning to marry his new lover by Friday, believing he was trading up from a simple spouse to an airline heiress worth hundreds of millions. But what she did next didn't just expose the truth. It grounded them forever, stripping away every lie, every stolen moment, and every dollar they'd counted as theirs. How had Clare, the woman he'd called financially illiterate to her face, orchestrated the purchase of Sterling Airlines without him noticing? What did Vanessa's face reveal when the truth about her empire's new owner walked through those boardroom doors? And when Richard finally understood what his wife had truly been during all those years of his betrayal, what became of the man who'd thrown away the one person who'd actually held all the power? The mahogany desk between them might as well have been a chasm, though Richard Carver felt nothing but relief as he watched Clare's steady hand hover over the divorce papers. Sunlight streamed through the attorney's office windows, catching the simple gold band she still wore, the one he'd bought before his career took off, before he understood what real wealth looked like. Her fingers were steady, no trembling, no tears, just that infuriatingly calm expression she'd perfected over their 15-year marriage. "You're certain about this?" Attorney Morrison asked, his tone professionally neutral, though his eyes held something Richard couldn't quite read. Pity, perhaps? The old man had known them both for years, had handled the purchase of their home in Riverside Estates, had drafted Richard's will back when he still believed Clare deserved to be in it. "Completely certain," Richard answered before Clare could speak. He leaned back in the leather chair, his Italian suit creasing perfectly across his chest. At 42, he'd maintained the physique that had attracted Clare at a college mixer 2 decades ago, though now it was for Vanessa's benefit. "We've grown apart, it happens. Clare understands." Clare's hazel eyes lifted to meet his, and for just a moment, something flickered there. Amusement? No, that couldn't be right. She nodded once, then signed her name in the same precise script she'd used on grocery lists and school permission slips for years. Clare Hartwell Carver, soon to be just Clare Hartwell again. "The terms are quite favorable to you, Mr. Carver," Morrison observed, sliding another document across his desk. "Mrs. Carver has agreed to a remarkably equitable split, considering the assets involved. The house, your portfolio, your consulting firm. She's requesting very little." Richard had stopped listening after "favorable to you." Of course the terms were good. Clare had no idea what half his assets were actually worth. She'd never paid attention to his work, never asked questions beyond, "How was your day, dear?" while serving pot roast like they were living in some 1950s fantasy. She organized charity galas and managed their household, played tennis at the country club with other wives who'd become decorative furniture in their husbands' lives. "I just want enough to start fresh," Clare said quietly, her voice carrying that gentle quality that had once charmed him and now grated like nails on a chalkboard. "The condo downtown will be sufficient, and the settlement you've proposed is fair, Richard." Fair. She thought $500,000 in liquid assets was fair, when his consulting firm alone was worth 10 times that. But Richard kept his expression neutral, sympathetic even. Let her think she was being reasonable. Let her take her little condo and her little settlement and build her little life while he lived in luxury with Vanessa. Vanessa Sterling. Just thinking her name sent electricity through him. At 36, she was everything Clare had never been. Ambitious, sharp, sophisticated. She understood his world because she'd built her own empire. Sterling Airlines, a boutique carrier specializing in luxury private charters, had made her wealthy beyond measure. Or so she'd told him during their first meeting at a conference in Miami 18 months ago. "There is one item," Clare said, drawing Richard's attention back to the present. She'd pulled a folder from her bag, something he'd barely noticed her carrying. Plain manila, unremarkable. "I need you to sign off on a business transaction. It's separate from the divorce." but we should finalize it now to avoid complications later. Morrison took the folder, his eyebrows rising slightly as he scanned the contents. This is a corporate transfer agreement. Mrs. Carver, you're listed as the primary shareholder of Hartwell Holdings? My maiden name, Claire explained, that same gentle tone never wavering. I've been managing some investments. Nothing that impacts our marital assets. These were structured separately years ago with inherited funds from my grandmother's estate. Richard, you're listed as having signing authority on one of the subsidiary holdings. I need you to relinquish that authority so the ownership structure is clean going forward. Richard barely glanced at the papers Morrison slid toward him. Investments? Claire? The woman who'd once asked him if stocks and bonds were the same thing? She'd probably put her grandmother's modest inheritance into a savings account and was now making it sound important because she needed to salvage some dignity from this divorce. What kind of investments? He asked, not because he cared, but because Morrison was watching him with that strange expression again. Property management primarily, Claire answered. Some commercial real estate, a few business acquisitions, nothing you need to concern yourself with. The phrase, business acquisitions, almost made him laugh. Claire, who'd never held a job beyond part-time bookkeeping for her father's hardware store before they married, was talking about business acquisitions, but he was in too good a mood to mock her. In 3 days, he'd be marrying Vanessa in a private ceremony in the Bahamas. In 3 days, his new life would officially begin. He signed the corporate transfer papers without reading them, his signature bold and confident across the bottom line. Morrison witnessed it, his pen scratching across the page with what sounded like reluctance. That's everything then, Richard said, standing and buttoning his suit jacket. He extended his hand to Claire, a gesture that felt appropriately civil. I hope you find happiness, Claire. I really do. She took his hand, her grip surprisingly firm. I'm certain we both will, Richard. Absolutely certain. There was something in her smile then, something he'd never seen in 15 years of marriage. It wasn't sadness or anger or any of the emotions he'd expected. It was confidence, pure and unshakable, and it unsettled him for reasons he couldn't articulate. But the feeling passed as quickly as it came. He had a flight to catch. Vanessa was meeting him at the airport in 2 hours, and they had a celebratory dinner planned at Marcello's, the restaurant where she'd once told him about her family's airline business over champagne and oysters. One more thing, Morrison said as Richard reached the door. Mrs. Carver, the finalization paperwork for the Sterling Airlines acquisition. When do you need those completed by? Richard's hand froze on the door handle. He turned slowly, certain he'd misheard. End of the week should be fine, Claire replied, gathering her papers with the same methodical precision she used for everything. I want to review the operational structure before I make any significant changes to their management team. Sterling Airlines? The words felt thick in Richard's mouth. What does that have to do with your real estate investments? Claire looked up at him, and this time her smile was absolutely radiant. Oh, didn't I mention? Hartwell Holdings completed the acquisition 3 days ago. I own Sterling Airlines now. Every plane, every route, every asset. Vanessa Sterling was quite motivated to sell after her company's debt structure became problematic. The office suddenly felt airless. Richard's mind raced, trying to connect pieces that made no sense. Vanessa owned Sterling Airlines outright. She'd inherited it from her father. She'd shown him photographs of their fleet, talked about expansion plans, described her net worth in figures that had made his own consulting income look modest. That's impossible, he said, his voice emerging strangled. Vanessa Sterling owns that company. Her family built it. Vanessa Sterling was the CEO, Claire corrected gently, of a company that was $93 million in debt and 6 months from bankruptcy. Her family built it, yes, and then her father gambled away their solvency before he died. She's been maintaining appearances for 3 years, living off lines of credit and investor confidence while the foundation crumbled. It was quite the house of cards. Morrison cleared his throat. I did advise you to review those corporate papers before signing, Mr. Carver. You just relinquished your claim to any oversight of Hartwell Holdings subsidiaries. Sterling Airlines being the most recent and most valuable acquisition. Richard's legs felt weak. He gripped the back of the chair he'd just vacated, his knuckles white against the leather. You're lying. This is some kind of revenge fantasy because I'm leaving you. I'm not lying, Richard, and this isn't revenge. Claire stood, smoothing her simple blue dress, department store quality, nothing like the designer clothes Vanessa wore. This is just business. Good business, actually. I got Sterling Airlines for 30 cents on the dollar once I factored in the debt. Vanessa thought she was negotiating with someone named C. Hartwell through intermediaries. She never knew she was selling to me until the papers were filed yesterday. Yesterday, Richard repeated numbly, the day before he'd signed the divorce papers. The day before he'd texted Vanessa that he was finally free, that they could start planning their future together. The timing worked out perfectly, Claire continued, and there was no malice in her voice, no triumph. Just that same gentle matter-of-factness she used when discussing the weather. See, I needed to understand exactly what you were leaving me for, who she really was beneath the designer clothes and the champagne lifestyle. So I did my research. 6 months of very thorough research. 6 months, Morrison confirmed, pulling another folder from his drawer. Mrs. Carver hired a team of forensic accountants and corporate investigators. Quite impressive work, actually. They uncovered 3 layers of shell companies Vanessa had created to hide the airline's true financial position. Richard's phone buzzed in his pocket. A text from Vanessa. Can't wait to celebrate your freedom tonight, baby. I have champagne on ice and some very exciting news about our future. See you at 7. Their future, a future built on Vanessa's airline empire, an empire his wife now owned. Why? The question emerged as barely more than a whisper. Why would you do this? Claire tilted her head, studying him as if he were a stranger. Perhaps he realized with creeping horror he'd always been a stranger to her. Perhaps she'd been the stranger all along. I did it because I could, Richard. Because while you were busy dismissing me as just a housewife, I was building something real. Did you ever wonder where I went during those afternoon tennis games? Or why I spent so much time with my laptop, which you assumed was for recipe searches and Pinterest boards? She laughed. A sound he'd heard 1,000 times, but never quite like this. Free, genuine, unrestrained. I have an MBA from Wharton, completed online over 5 years. I have a portfolio worth $200 million across real estate, tech startups, and now aviation. Hartwell Holdings has 17 employees and partnerships with firms across 3 countries. The room tilted. Richard grabbed the chair harder, his perfect life disintegrating with each word from his soon-to-be ex-wife's mouth. I knew about the affair 6 weeks after it started, Claire said softly. Philadelphia, the Ritz-Carlton, room 1408. You told me you were at a consulting conference. You were, but Vanessa was there too. I hired a private investigator, not because I was heartbroken, that came later, but because I needed to understand what I was dealing with. And when I dug into Vanessa Sterling, I found a woman who was very, very good at pretending to be successful. Just like someone else I knew. I am successful, Richard protested, but the words sounded hollow even to his own ears. Your consulting firm hasn't had a legitimate client in 2 years, Claire replied. You've been living off my investments, the ones I made in your name to protect your ego. The house, my money. The car, my money. Your portfolio that you were so generous to split with me, built entirely on returns from investments I structured and managed while you took credit and took Vanessa to expensive dinners you couldn't actually afford. Morrison stood, closing his folders with quiet efficiency. I believe you have everything you need, Mrs. Carver. Mr. Carver, the divorce will be finalized in 60 days. I'd strongly suggest you retain separate counsel for any future proceedings. Claire moved toward the door, pausing beside Richard. This close, he could smell her perfume. The same drugstore brand she'd worn for years because she'd always said expensive perfume was wasteful. Now he wondered what else had been an act, what other truths he'd missed while assuming he was the brilliant one, the successful one, the one who'd outgrown their marriage. Vanessa's going to call you soon, Claire said, probably in the next hour, once her lawyers inform her that I've accelerated the transition timeline. She'll be desperate, Richard. She'll probably tell you she loves you, that together you can fight this, that her family has resources to help reclaim the company. They don't, and she doesn't love you. She never did. She needed someone to help her maintain the illusion of success while she found a way out of her disaster. You were convenient, unthreatening, and she thought you had money. You can't do this, Richard said, hating how his voice cracked. You can't just destroy people's lives because you're angry. I'm not destroying anything, Richard. I'm simply removing the illusions. Vanessa destroyed her own company through mismanagement and desperation. You destroyed our marriage through betrayal and contempt. I'm just the person who decided to stop pretending none of it mattered. She pulled her car keys from her purse, keys to a 10-year-old sedan he'd been embarrassed to be seen in. Oh, and about that condo downtown I'm taking in the settlement? I already owned it. Bought it 2 years ago as an investment property. I'm just making it official now. She left then, her footsteps steady and unhurried down the corridor. Richard stood frozen in Morrison's office, his phone buzzing again and again as texts from Vanessa began flooding in, each one more frantic than the last. Morrison gathered his papers, not looking at Richard. For what it's worth, Mr. Carver, she gave you multiple opportunities to actually see her, to ask questions, to be curious about the woman you married. She would have shared everything with you if you'd ever bothered to look beyond your own assumptions. How long have you known? Richard asked. About her business? About what she was building? I've been her attorney for 12 years, Morrison replied. Since before you married. I drafted the prenuptial agreement you didn't want and she didn't enforce. I've watched her build an empire while you built an affair, and I've watched her break her own heart trying to decide if she should save you from yourself or let you go. She should have told me, Richard said desperately. She should have said something. She did, Mr. Carver. She told you everything that mattered, that she loved you, that she valued you, that she wanted to build a life with you. You just never bothered to listen. Vanessa Sterling's penthouse overlooked the river, floor-to-ceiling windows framing a view that had graced the cover of Metropolitan Living magazine 2 years ago. Richard had been there dozens of times, each visit reinforcing his belief that he'd finally entered the world of real success. The marble floors, the imported furniture, the original paintings that lined the walls. All of it screamed wealth in a way his shared home with Clare never had. Now he stood in that same living room, watching Vanessa pace like a caged animal, her designer dress rumpled, her usually perfect makeup smudged from crying. The champagne she'd promised sat unopened on the counter. The exciting news she'd mentioned had transformed into a nightmare neither of them had seen coming. She can't do this, Vanessa said for the 15th time, her voice raw. There has to be something in the contract, some clause we can exploit. My lawyers are reviewing everything. Your lawyers worked for a company Clare now owns, Richard pointed out, slumped on the leather sofa that probably cost more than most cars. She's their employer now. Who do you think they're going to protect? Vanessa whirled on him, her eyes blazing. Then we hire new lawyers. We fight this. Together, Richard, we can pool our resources. What resources? The question emerged bitter, exhausted. Vanessa, I need you to tell me the truth. All of it. No more pretending. She froze, her face cycling through emotions. Fear, calculation, defiance, finally landing on resignation. She sank into the chair across from him, suddenly looking older than her 36 years. Sterling Airlines has been dying for 3 years, she admitted. My father left us $30 million in debt when he died. He'd mortgaged everything, the planes, the hangar facilities, even our trademark. I've been trying to save it, Richard. I've borrowed from everyone I could, leveraged every relationship, made promises to investors I knew I couldn't keep. I thought if I could just hold on long enough, find the right partnership or merger opportunity. You thought you'd marry someone wealthy enough to bail you out, Richard finished. Someone who believed you were rich, who wouldn't ask too many questions, who'd be flattered by your attention. That's not fair, Vanessa protested, but her voice lacked conviction. I did have feelings for you, real feelings. Did you? Richard stood, moving to the windows. Below, the city glittered with possibilities that now felt utterly out of reach. Or did you have feelings for what you thought I could provide? Vanessa was quiet for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was small, defeated. I don't know anymore. Maybe at first it was strategic. You seem successful, confident. You talked about your consulting firm and your investments like you were building something impressive, and you were married, which seemed safe, complicated enough that you wouldn't dig too deep into my finances, but available enough to be useful. Useful, Richard repeated. The word tasted like ashes. But then it became real, Vanessa insisted, standing and crossing to him. Richard, what I feel for you now is real. What we could have together. We don't have anything, Richard interrupted. Don't you understand? Claire didn't just buy your company. She exposed both of us. Everything I told you about my success, my wealth, my portfolio, it was all her. She built it. She managed it. She made it grow while I took credit and used it to impress you. I'm not successful, Vanessa. I'm a fraud who married someone extraordinary and never noticed. His phone rang. Claire's number. He stared at it, torn between answering and throwing the device through Vanessa's expensive windows. Answer it, Vanessa urged. Maybe she's willing to negotiate. Maybe there's a deal we can make. Richard answered, putting the call on speaker. Hello, Claire. Hello, Richard. I hope I'm not interrupting. Her voice was calm, professional, nothing like the gentle housewife tone he'd lived with for 15 years. I wanted to give you both a courtesy call. I assume Vanessa's there with you? I'm here, Vanessa said, moving closer to the phone. Claire, we should talk about this. Woman to woman, businesswoman to businesswoman. I'm sure we can reach an arrangement that benefits everyone. Businesswoman to businesswoman, Claire repeated, and Richard could hear the slight edge enter her voice. That's interesting phrasing, Vanessa, considering you ran your company into the ground through a combination of incompetence and desperation. But I'm not calling to negotiate. I'm calling to inform you both of some decisions I've made regarding Sterling Airlines' future. Richard's stomach clenched. What decisions? First, all luxury charter operations are suspended effective immediately. The planes will be repurposed for cargo operations, which are considerably more profitable and less dependent on maintaining an image of exclusivity. Second, the executive offices are being closed. The penthouse lease you're currently standing in, Vanessa? That was paid for by the company. You have 30 days to vacate. Vanessa's face went white. You can't do that. I have rights. You have the rights outlined in the severance package my lawyers will deliver tomorrow, Claire interrupted, which is actually quite generous considering the mess you left. You'll receive 6 months of your base salary. The real base salary, not the inflated number you told everyone, including Richard. That should give you time to find new employment. New employment, Vanessa whispered. You're destroying my life. No, Vanessa, I'm ending your performance. There's a difference. Claire's voice softened slightly. You had real talent once. Before your father died, before the debt became overwhelming, you were actually building something legitimate. But instead of admitting you needed help, you constructed elaborate lies and hurt people to maintain your facade. That's not business. That's just cruelty wrapped in ambition. Richard found his voice. And me? What happens to me and your plans, Claire? You. She paused and he could picture her in that condo she already owned, sitting at a desk with her laptop, managing the empire he'd never seen. You get exactly what you asked for, Richard. You're free. Free of me. Free of any obligation to pretend you care about our marriage. Free to build whatever life you can with your own resources instead of mine. The house, he said desperately. We agreed I'd keep the house. You'll keep half of the proceeds when it sells, Claire corrected. I've already hired a realtor. It lists next week. Your consulting firm, which, as I mentioned, hasn't had legitimate revenue in 2 years, is entirely yours. As are the debts you've accumulated trying to maintain a lifestyle you couldn't afford. The credit cards you thought were joint accounts? Actually, in your name only. I had them restructured 18 months ago when I realized where this marriage was heading. The room spun. Richard gripped the back of the sofa, Vanessa's hand suddenly on his shoulder. Whether for support or seeking support, he couldn't tell. This is revenge, he accused. You're punishing us because we fell in love. Claire's laugh was gentle, almost sad. Richard, if I wanted revenge, I could do so much worse. I could release the evidence I have of your affair to your professional network. You violated ethics clauses with 3 different clients by conducting personal business during billable hours. I could share Vanessa's financial fraud with the SEC. She falsified company records to mislead investors. I could make both your lives genuinely difficult. Then why don't you? Vanessa challenged, anger overtaking fear in her voice. Because I'm not cruel, Claire replied simply. I'm just done being invisible, done being dismissed, done letting you both build your fantasy on the foundation of my work while treating me like I was nothing. She sighed, a sound Richard had heard countless times across dinner tables and in darkened bedrooms. You'll both be fine eventually. You're both smart enough, capable enough to rebuild if you're willing to be honest about who you really are. But that's your choice to make. Claire, wait, Richard started, but the line went dead. Vanessa pulled away from him, her expression hardening. This is your fault, she hissed. You told me you were wealthy. You made me think you could help save everything. I wasted 18 months on you. Wasted? Richard turned to face her, seeing her clearly perhaps for the first time. The desperation in her eyes, the calculation in the set of her mouth. She'd never loved him. Claire had been right about that. You used me, just like I used Claire. We're both exactly what we deserve. Get out, Vanessa said coldly. Get out of my apartment. It's not your apartment anymore, Richard reminded her, but he left anyway, his footsteps echoing through the marble foyer that would soon belong to someone else. The coffee shop was nothing special, a chain franchise with generic artwork and piped-in music that was supposed to be contemporary. Richard sat by the window, watching Claire approach from across the parking lot. 3 weeks had passed since the divorce finalized. 3 weeks since his entire life had been restructured by the woman he'd spent 15 years underestimating. She looked different, not dramatically so. Same simple style, same practical haircut. But she carried herself differently now, confident, unburdened, free. Thank you for meeting me, Richard said as she slid into the seat across from him. She'd ordered at the counter first, some complicated latte with extra foam and caramel. He'd never known she liked caramel. I almost didn't come, Claire admitted, but curiosity got the better of me. What did you want to discuss? Richard wrapped his hands around his plain black coffee, searching for the right words. I wanted to apologize and to understand. Understand what? Everything. He gestured vaguely, encompassing the coffee shop, the situation, the ruins of what he'd thought his life was. Why you stayed so long if you knew. Why you built all of that without telling me. Why you let me think I was the successful one. Claire took a sip of her latte, considering. I stayed because I loved you, Richard. For a long time, I genuinely believed you'd eventually see me as a partner instead of an accessory. I built my business quietly because the one time I tried to share it with you. Do you remember? 4 years ago, I mentioned I was thinking about taking some business courses. He didn't remember. The realization must have shown on his face because she nodded sadly. You laughed, she continued. You patted my hand and said something about me being too sweet for the business world, that I should focus on the things I was good at, like organizing the charity auction. So I stopped trying to share. I built my empire in the spaces between your attention, and I let you think you were the impressive one because, she paused, her eyes distant, because I still hoped you'd eventually ask, that you'd be curious enough about your wife to wonder what I did with my days. And when I never did, I kept building, and I kept hoping, until Philadelphia, until I saw the texts, the emails, the evidence that you weren't just uninterested in me. You actively disdained me, called me boring to Vanessa, laughed about my simple tastes and my lack of ambition. That's when hope died, Richard. That's when I started planning my exit. Richard flinched. He'd forgotten about those messages, the cruel ways he'd described his wife to impress his mistress. I was wrong about everything, about you, about Vanessa, about what mattered. Yes, you were. Can I ask what you're going to do now, with Sterling Airlines, with your business? Claire's face brightened, genuine enthusiasm breaking through. Sterling is already more profitable than it's been in 5 years. Cargo operations are booming, and I've negotiated partnerships with 3 major shipping companies. I'm keeping the company name. Sterling had positive brand recognition, and Vanessa's father did build something good before he lost his way. As for the rest, Hartwell Holdings has opportunities I'm excited to explore. There's a struggling hotel chain in the Pacific Northwest that has potential. And I'm considering getting into renewable energy infrastructure. She spoke about business with the same passion Richard had once brought to his work, before his consulting firm had devolved into a facade. He felt envy, certainly, but also something else. Admiration, regret. And personally, he asked, not sure he wanted the answer, but needing to know. Personally, I'm learning what it's like to not hide who I am. I've started dating, actually. Someone I met through business circles. He's a professor of economics at the university, consults for nonprofits on sustainable development. He's kind, Richard, and he asks me questions about my work. He's curious about me. The words shouldn't have hurt. He'd lost the right to be hurt, but they did anyway. I'm glad, he managed. You deserve that. I do, Claire agreed simply. What about you? What's next for Richard Carver? I don't know, he admitted. The consulting firm is basically defunct. I'm looking for actual employment for the first time in years. I've moved into a small apartment in the suburbs. And Vanessa, he trailed off. Hasn't returned your calls, Claire finished. I know. She's been quite vocal in certain circles about how I destroyed her life. Meanwhile, she's working as a regional manager for a hotel chain. Decent job, honest work, but not the glamorous empire she pretended to run. You're keeping tabs on her? On both of you, Claire confirmed. Not obsessively, but I like to know how my decisions play out. It's part of being a good businesswoman, following through, understanding consequences, learning from outcomes. Richard laughed bitterly. We're your case study in what not to do. You're my reminder of why authenticity matters, Claire corrected gently. Both of you constructed false realities and then got trapped in them. Vanessa couldn't admit her business was failing, so she let it collapse catastrophically. You couldn't admit you'd stopped growing professionally, so you lived off someone else's success while pretending it was yours. And I couldn't admit my marriage was dead, so I stayed invisible until I couldn't anymore. You're including yourself in that? Richard asked, surprised. Of course. I played my role in this tragedy, Richard. I let you diminish me. I let my fear of conflict and my hope for your eventual attention keep me quiet when I should have demanded to be seen. I'm not innocent here. I'm just the person who decided to stop lying. To myself and to you. They sat in silence for a moment, the coffee shop noise washing over them. A child laughed somewhere behind them. A barista called out someone's name, mispronouncing it cheerfully. I looked you up, Richard finally said. After everything, your Wharton degree, your investment portfolio, the articles about emerging business leaders that mentioned C. Hartwell, but never included a photo. You've been interviewed by business journals. You spoke at a conference in Singapore last year. While you thought I was at a spa weekend with my college friends, Claire supplied. How did I never know? Because you never asked, Richard, and because I structured my entire life around making sure you didn't have to know. I protected your ego at the expense of my own identity. She finished her latte, setting the cup down with finality. But I'm done with that now. Can I ask one more thing? You can ask. Would you do it again? If you could go back, knowing everything, would you still marry me? Build your business in secret? Buy Sterling Airlines? Claire considered this, her gaze drifting to the window where sunlight caught the edges of passing cars. I'd marry you, she said slowly, because who I was at 22 loved who you were then, and that love was real. But I wouldn't hide again. I'd demand to be seen from the start, and if you couldn't do that, I'd leave before 15 years passed. As for Sterling Airlines, that wasn't about revenge, Richard. No matter what you think, it was a good investment opportunity, and I took it. That Vanessa happened to be your mistress, and that the timing happened to coincide with our divorce. Those were just convenient factors that made a smart business decision also personally satisfying. She stood, gathering her purse. Richard stood too, uncertain how to end this meeting, their final conversation as people who'd once promised forever. I hope you find what you're looking for, Claire said. Real success, real connection, whatever it is. But find it honestly, Richard. Stop building castles out of other people's stones. I will, he promised, and meant it. And Claire, for what it's worth, I'm proud of you. I know I have no right to be, but I am. You're extraordinary. I always was, she replied, not unkindly. You just never bothered to look. She left then, walking out into the afternoon sunshine, leaving Richard with cold coffee and the weight of everything he'd lost through his own blindness. Through the window, he watched her drive away in that modest sedan she'd always preferred, the one he'd been embarrassed by, never knowing it was just one small piece of a much larger picture he'd refused to see. 6 months later, Richard's phone buzzed with a notification as he sat in his new office. Modest, shared space in a business incubator for struggling entrepreneurs. He'd taken a job as an actual consultant, earning a fraction of what he'd pretended to make, but it was real work for real clients. Honest work, for the first time in years. The notification was a news alert. Sterling Airlines announces major expansion. Hartwell Holdings acquires Pacific Air Fleet. He clicked through to the article, seeing Claire's photo, professional headshot, confident smile, the caption identifying her as CEO of Hartwell Holdings. The article detailed her business acumen, her strategic acquisitions, her emergence as one of the most successful entrepreneurs under 45 in the aviation industry. There was no mention of him, no mention of their marriage, their divorce, the drama that had felt so all-consuming just months ago. In the story of Clare Hartwell's rise, Richard Carver was completely invisible, exactly as he'd once made her feel. His desk phone rang, a potential client, someone who'd heard he was good with small business consulting, that he was honest and thorough. Small praise but earned praise. Real praise. Richard Carver speaking, he answered and got to work. 3 cities away, in the Sterling Airlines headquarters that had once been Vanessa's pretend kingdom and was now Claire's genuine empire, a meeting was concluding. Claire shook hands with the Pacific Air executives, finalizing details that would double her fleet size and expand operations to 50 new markets. Ms. Hartwell, one of the executives said as they prepared to leave, I have to ask, Sterling Airlines was considered a failing company just 18 months ago. How did you turn it around so dramatically? Claire smiled, the same gentle smile she'd perfected over years of being underestimated. I stopped pretending it was something it wasn't, she answered. I looked at what was actually there. Good planes, skilled pilots, solid infrastructure, and I built from that foundation honestly. No illusions, no facades. Just real work toward real goals. That's simple? That's simple, she confirmed, though simple isn't always easy. After they left, she stood at the window of her office, looking out over the hangar where planes bearing the Sterling name were being serviced, loaded, prepared for legitimate business that would generate legitimate profit. She'd kept the name partly for brand recognition, partly as a reminder. Vanessa Sterling had built a beautiful lie and called it success. Richard Carver had lived off someone else's achievement and called it his own. And Clare Hartwell had hidden her light for years, afraid of outshining someone who'd never deserved her dimming. All 3 of them had been grounded by their own dishonesty in different ways, but only one had learned to build something real from the wreckage. Her phone buzzed. Marcus, the economics professor she'd been seeing, asking about dinner plans. She smiled and responded, then turned back to her work. Real work, built on real foundations, by someone who'd finally learned that being seen clearly was worth infinitely more than being loved blindly. The planes outside would fly tomorrow, and the day after, and the year after that. Not because they were part of anyone's illusion, but because they were real, solid, maintained honestly, and managed wisely. Just like the woman who now owned them. Richard Carver had divorced her to marry his mistress, completely unaware his wife had just bought that mistress's airline business. But what Claire did hadn't just grounded them both, it had freed them all to finally face the truth of who they'd always been. And in the end, truth had proved far more valuable than any empire built on lies.